Okay, pre-AP biology. You guys are learning from home today, so I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of some lecture notes pertaining to a topic called classifying life. I will provide you with the lecture note fill-in notes when you get back to class, or you can print them out at home. There should be a link to these on Buzz. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint with you today. We'll kind of start it, um, on this video, and then we'll kind of finish it up in class later on this week. So we'll start off here with a picture of a pretty interesting organism. I'm not sure if anybody knows what this organism is, but this is a sea anemone. It's a hard word for me to say, anemone. Anyway, sea anemones live underwater. They're aquatic organisms, but kind of looking at it, you may not really know like what type of organism it is. I mean, it's kind of a bizarre looking thing. Is it a plant? I mean, it is green, so I don't know. Maybe it's a plant. Is it like a fungus? Is it an animal? I mean, like, what is this thing? So a lot of people like have no idea like what kind of organism it is or how to categorize it or classify it. So we're going to learn today, what this thing is and kind of what characteristics it has that other organisms like it kind of share. So just to kind of answer that question, what is this? A sea anemone is an animal. So believe it or not, this is an animal that lives at the bottom of the ocean. It doesn't move. It's kind of a sessile organism. They kind of stay permanently attached to the ocean floor. But this thing is more closely related to you than a lot of other living things on this planet. So we have to kind of figure out why that is. It's a kind of bizarre looking thing. All right. So classifying life, just talking about the word classifying or categorizing, we do have over 2 million species of organisms. Sea anemones are just one of those. And there's several different species of sea anemones. So, they're not like that picture you saw earlier. That's not the only type. There's other ones as well that are a little bit different. And the other day we talked about this word species and what that means, right? Organisms that can interbreed, produce fertile offspring. So, each species is very unique, but there's over 2 million of them out there currently on the planet. So, in order for us to kind of really understand, how we classify life, I think it's kind of important to understand why we should even classify things in the first place. Why should we take these 2 million species and put them into different categories? That's what classifying is, right? So, I mean, think about this. If you went to a grocery store, let's say your mom said, "Hey, go to the grocery store and pick me up a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, and a gallon of Breyer's mint chocolate chip ice cream." That's what your mom says to you, right? So you go to the store, and as soon as you walk in Strax or wherever it is you're going to go shopping at, I mean, you know exactly where to go to find the loaf of bread, right? Bread aisle. You know exactly where to go to find the milk, right? Go to the dairy section. Right where to find the Breyer's ice cream, the mint chocolate chip, it's right there in the frozen foods, right by the ice cream section. And you can pick those things up because everything in a grocery store is categorized. They're all in different sections based on characteristics. Imagine going to a grocery store where everything is just thrown on the floor. There are no aisles. There's just a big pile of food like everywhere. I mean, you would never be able to find anything that you want, right? So, I mean, we can go to a grocery store, we can find the ice cream section, we can find the gallons of ice cream, we can find Breyer's, that specific brand, and then we can find that flavor that we want. I mean, everything is categorized and organized nice and neatly for us at a grocery store. we have a similar way to categorize things in biology. So initially, just to kind of look at this kind of in a general perspective. Like if you go to a grocery store, there's like certain areas of the grocery store where you find a lot of items, right? I mean, like when you first walk into Strax, you run into like the produce section, right? Where you find all the fresh fruit, all the vegetables. I mean, there's a variety of things there, but there's a lot of things in that section. Then you go to like the meat section, right? Where they have all the steaks and the hamburgers and the bacon and all of the pork chops, all that's in one section, right? Then you got like the cereal aisle, whatever. I mean, there are certain like big sections in a grocery store. Well, of all the 2 million living things that we have on this planet, we have six big categories that we put them in. Okay. Starting with the bacteria. We have a lot of bacteria, so there's actually two different kingdoms that we put them in. We have a kingdom called the protists, funguses or fungi. I got a good joke for you. Why did the carrot date the mushroom? Because he was a fun guy. Get it? I think it's a funny joke. Anyway, we have plants, we have animals. All right, so these are the six categories, the big, sections of the grocery store where we put a lot of living things. Now, when we are categorizing living things, everything that's alive, we have to answer three questions about it. And these three questions really kind of determine where we put them, like what kingdom we put them in. Number one, is it a unicellular or multicellular organism? It's one or the other, right? Because I'm going to go back to this real quick. Oops. Some of these kingdoms are strictly unicellular. Some of them are multicellular, some of them are both. So we have to kind of know the answer to this question. Is it unicellular or is it multicellular? Another question we have to answer is how does it get food? Right? These are two terms that we should know, but if you don't know them, you need to learn them. All right, is the organism autotrophic or heterotrophic? So does it have to make its own food like photosynthesis, right? Plants, or can it obtain its own food and eat? Heterotroph. Animals obviously are heterotrophic. But again, every organism on Earth is one or the other. Is the organism, these are two words you probably don't know yet, but maybe you do. Are they prokaryotic or eukaryotic? Now, these two terms deal more with the cellular structure of the organism. I know we haven't really talked much about cells yet as far as like what's inside and all that, but there's basically two different types. All right. Prokaryotic are very simple cells. Like there's not much to them. There's not much in them. They're functioning at a very basic level. A good example is bacteria. Bacteria are prokaryotic. Eukaryotic are much more complex. Animal cells, for example, right? You might have learned in middle school, all those organelles like ribosomes and Golgi bodies and all that stuff. Those are complex cells. Those are eukaryotic. We'll learn a lot more about those down the road, but for right now, every organism is one or the other. All right. So when we classify things, when we categorize them, we have to kind of answer those three questions. So let's start off with the Archaebacteria. Archaebacteria, this is one of the two kingdoms. Archaebacteria are unicellular, so one cell. They're also prokaryotic, which means that they're very simple cells. Okay, very simple cells. Some of them are autotrophic. I mean, so some of them can make their own food. Some of them are heterotrophic. They have to obtain their own food. A couple things about Archaebacteria that I think are kind of interesting. One of them is that they only live, or they primarily live, in areas where there's no breathable oxygen. Like, for example, inside of a volcano. You would think they're like, what could possibly live inside of a volcano? It's like super hot. there's like a bunch of sulfur gas and there's no breathable oxygen in there, but these guys can live pretty well there. Okay. We call that an anaerobic environment where there's no oxygen gas. So, you guys don't live in an anaerobic environment, right? You guys are breathing oxygen all the time, but these guys can actually live in those environments. Another term here is called extremophiles. Extremophiles is just a kind of a general term that we use to describe bacteria that live in like really harsh or extreme environments. Sometimes they'll live in areas where it's very hot, like again inside of a volcano, where the water can be highly acidic, almost like battery acid, but some bacteria can live in that. The water might be really salty, but they can survive in that. Extremophiles are bacteria that can live in these really, really harsh, extreme environments. One thing about them um, is that a lot of scientists think that these bacteria that are still on the planet today, they're the ancestors or they're the descendants of some of the first living things to ever be on our planet. Our planet was a lot different, billions of years ago. It was a much different place. And, in order for life to have survived, it would have had to have survived in very harsh environments. And Archaebacteria are thought to have been the first living things on the planet. So they're kind of a kingdom all to themselves. This is a picture here of um, it's like a little salt flat or a little salt pond out in the middle of like Utah. This pond, has the acidity, I should say, has the salinity. I mean, think about like salt water, like ocean water, and take that salinity or that salinity level, that salt level, and multiply it by like 100. Like think about how salty that would be. This little pond here is like that. It's like an extremely high amount of salt in it. And you would think nothing could really live in that. But again, there's archaebacteria that live in areas like this, and they're very successful, and they have been for millions and millions of years. Eubacteria is the second kingdom. Um, Pretty much, like when you think of bacteria, this is what we kind of think of. Eubacteria can kind of live in a lot of places. They usually don't live in these extreme places. But again, they're unicellular, they're prokaryotic, just like archaebacteria are. Some can cause diseases, like strep throat, for example, is caused by a eubacteria. But like when we think about bacteria, again, these are kind of the ones that kind of come to mind. Some bacteria, eubacteria, are really beneficial. I mean, don't think that bacteria are always bad. I mean, there's bacteria that live in your intestinal tract, and they actually help you digest food. They've been in your digestive system since you were born. In fact, even before you were born. When you're developing inside your mother, you actually have bacteria in your gut that are helping you break down food and digest it so that when you're born and then you eventually start eating solid food, you have those bacteria in there. They're actually really beneficial to us. So yeah, there's a lot of things like that that are beneficial. Bacteria are really, really tiny. Here's some here. I think these kind of look like little green cheesy poofs, but whatever, they're bacteria. Here's a really good picture. I like this. What you're looking at here is the tip of a pin, like you would pop a balloon with. So, I mean, look at all these little bacteria on the tip of that pin. And this is magnified, several hundred times, whatever. But I mean, you can just see how many of them there are. So that kind of gives you an idea of the size of these bacteria. They're extremely small, but again, they've been successful for a long time. Protists. Protists are the most diverse kingdom, which means that there's a lot of different types of them. I mean, there's some protists that are kind of like little plants, some that are kind of like little animals. They're all aquatic, which means that they live in water. Now, one thing that kind of separates them from bacteria is that they're eukaryotic. So these are much more complex cells. You can kind of see the pictures here in the background, right? These are all different types of protists, and you can just kind of see the cellular structure is a lot more complex than, let's say, bacteria are. Again, they're mostly unicellular. There are a couple of multicellular protists, but most of them are unicellular. They can be heterotrophs, they can be autotrophs. There's a couple examples. Maybe you've heard of things like paramecium before, amoeba, plasmodium. This is kind of an interesting protist. It actually causes one of the world's deadliest diseases called malaria. The little plasmodium protist is actually carried by mosquitoes that live in the tropics, and they kind of pass the disease on from one person to the next. So that's kind of a good one to know. We'll talk more about that one down the road, and when we get into the immune system. There's some more protists. I mean, you can kind of see like just the complexity of them. Like there's a lot of stuff. Like this little guy here in the bottom left, got these little hairs sticking out of them, got a bunch of stuff on the inside. I mean, a lot of little organelles and different things doing different functions. I mean, just the complexity alone tells you that this is kind of a step above bacteria, right? So there's some protists there. Funguses, kingdom fungi. I'm still thinking about my joke I told you earlier, how funny it was. Anyway, funguses, just kind of going through the list here. Funguses are multicellular. There's one that's unicellular, it's yeast, but like when you think of a fungus, you probably think of like mushrooms and things like that. They're eukaryotic, so again, complex cells. They're heterotrophs, so they have to obtain food. So funguses are not like plants. They can't photosynthesize, they have to obtain their own food. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting about a fungus is they don't really have like a digestive system, like stomachs and things like that. So they have to kind of absorb their food from the outside, and they have to like break it down externally, and then they can kind of absorb it internally. So, it's kind of a way that they have to do it, which kind of separates them out from other organisms. Here's a picture in the background of athlete's foot fungus. This is like a really extreme picture, but obviously, if you had athlete's foot, you probably would go to a doctor before it got like this severe. But anyway, this guy didn't. So what you're seeing there is the actual fungus, and it's living on his skin. And what it's doing is it's using his skin as a food source. It's breaking down, it's releasing enzymes and breaking down his skin and feeding off of it. That's probably why it burns. It doesn't feel very good because the fungus is literally like, absorbing nutrients like from your skin. So that's not a good thing, obviously. But just one example of fungus. Plants. I think we know that plants are multicellular. They are eukaryotic, so they have complex cells, and they are definitely autotrophic. There are no heterotrophic plants. I know people want to say Venus flytraps. What are those then? But Venus flytraps photosynthesize, so they're all autotrophic no matter what. They're terrestrial, so they live on land. There are a few aquatic plants, but most plants live on land. They have something called cell walls. We'll look at that when we get into cell structure, but they're kind of rigid structures that allow the plant to be able to stand up, and kind of grow and have a really solid structure to it. The cell walls are all responsible for that. They also have chloroplasts, which are little organelles that are used to photosynthesize. You've probably heard of those before. And then we have the animal kingdom. Animals are all multicellular. There are no unicellular animals. If there are, we call them protists. But animals are all multicellular. They're eukaryotic, so again, complex cells. They're heterotrophic, and they digest their food internally. So they're kind of different from funguses in that way. Most animals are mobile. I guess the sea anemone might be an exception to that. They also reproduce sexually. So animals are not asexual, they're sexual organisms. And we talked about that. All right, guys, that is it for this. Thanks for listening to me. When you come back to class, we'll kind of skim over this real quick again. then we'll finish up this PowerPoint. So have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.